Every day, this dog peered into a storm drain, and when it eventually opened, people worldwide were horrified to see what was within. While stray dogs are prevalent, one dog in particular in Turkey captured people's attention with his behavior. This dog was hairy, filthy, strayed pup who frequently walked down the street. Even though he lived on the streets, the dog was very friendly and loved getting pets from passing people. As he went down one street, he suddenly smelled something delicious. The day started as usual, with the dog happily trotting down the road, wagging his tail at anyone who looked his way. He followed his nose until he found himself in front of a butcher's shop, where the dog watched through the window as customers bought large chops of meat for the dinner. The dog's stomach growled loudly at the sight of the food, which made him realize how hungry he was. Inside the shop, a young woman named Annie was finishing paying for a couple of large steaks. After finishing, Annie thanked the butcher and left the store. As she was leaving, she was walking down the street towards her house when she heard a loud gurgle and whimper. The young woman startled and turned to see a stray dog staring back at her with sad eyes. The dog's stomach growled this time, and Annie realized the issue. The dog was obviously stray and very hungry. Seeing the starving animal, Annie felt bad for it. She looked down at the steaks she had just purchased before marching back into the butcher's shop and demanding any cut-offs or bones that the man wouldn't sell. The butcher gladly gave the woman what she requested. Annie then left the store and searched the area for the stray dog. She soon discovered him watching her from a distance. The woman knelt on the ground and carefully held the bones she had gotten for him. At first, the dog was wary and didn't want to get too close to the woman. But the longer she held the food out to him, the less the animal could resist creeping closer to get the meal. Eventually, Annie gained the dog's trust enough that he began to wag his tail and accepted the large bone off of her. However, instead of eating the food right away, Annie saw the same stray dog from yesterday the following day. The animal appeared to have noticed her as well and came joyfully bounding up to the woman, as if he had somewhere to be perplexed about the dog's reaction. But not wanting to question it much, he simply stood back up and made her way back home. The young woman couldn't spend much time with the dog before she left because of commitments. But she made sure to buy some of the sausages from a nearby store. However, the dog didn't immediately eat them and instead walked off again. The owner smiled at the dog's enthusiasm for her and fussed over it. Annie was interested in the animal's behavior, but could not follow him since she needed to go on with her day. Annie discovered the stray dog again on the third day, but it appeared he was waiting for her this time. The woman had started carrying treats in her bag, hoping to give them to the poor stray. The young woman smiled as she approached the dog and gave him the treats she had this time. However, when the dog turned around and walked away, Annie started to follow him. As they approached the busy street, Annie watched as the shaggy dog made his way over the storm drain. The dog sat down next to the drain and stared into it before dropping one of the treats Annie had just given him and eating his own. The young woman was very perplexed as to what the dog was doing. And for the following few days, Annie would discover the dog sitting and gazing into the storm drain. Every time Annie gave the pet treats, he would drop half of the food into the drain before eating his share. Eventually, Annie grew curious and decided to investigate what was so interesting in the drain. But she had no idea what she would find. Annie crept over the storm drain, wary of the dog guarding it. Annie looked down into the drain as she was directly above it and gasped at what she saw. At that point, the young woman reached for her phone and dialed 911 because she would undoubtedly need their assistance. About 30 minutes later, a couple of firemen arrived and asked what was wrong. She explained to them what she had seen, and the men quickly got to work. They walked over to the storm drain, but at that moment, the stray dog started to growl at them, not wanting to bite. The firemen stopped. They didn't know what to do, but fortunately, Annie knew. She carefully approached the dog, reassuring the animal that the men were only there to help. At this point, a crowd had gathered around the firemen to watch them open the storm drain because it was in the middle of a busy street. She then held the treat out to the dog, and when he finally came over to take it, she grabbed a hold of him to keep him away from the drain and the firefighters. The onlookers were startled when the firemen eventually showed what the stray dog had been so preoccupied with. Within the drain was a little kitten in one of the firemen's arms. However, that wasn't the end of it. The firefighters entered the storm sewer 4 more times. emerging each time with a new cat in their arms. At that moment, the stray dog could escape Annie's arm and bound to the firemen holding the little kittens. Annie knew something was down there because she had seen it when she peered in. But she had no idea 5 tiny and adorable kittens had been stuck. Annie asked the firemen how such young kittens ended up in such a predicament. The firemen replied that they were likely swept into the drain during a heavy downpour. As soon as the dog saw the small felines, he began to wag his tail and sniff at them. The kittens muttily stared back at the canine. However, given that they were imprisoned, they weren't hungry. Upon learning this, Annie turned to the stray dog and saw that the kitten's survival had been made possible by his daily giving off his food. Upon witnessing such a lovely generosity, Annie realized what she wanted to do next. The firemen agreed and gave the kittens to Annie after she promised to take them home and raise them until they were ready to be adopted. The young woman started walking towards her house before turning around and yelling to the stray dog, "Come on, Benny, it's time to go home." When the kittens were big enough to move, the dog enthusiastically bound up to her and cared for them, all while finding 4 happy homes. She kept one of the kittens for herself since she liked them. The family lived happily together, and neither Fudge the cat nor Benny was even slightly concerned that they would end up on the street because Annie had fallen in love with the shaggy dog and couldn't bear to leave him on the streets after what he had done for the tiny felines. Because Annie loved them too much, they reciprocated her love in kind. What a wonderful story! If you want to stay updated with more fantastic stories, let me know what you think of them in the comment section below. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.